Hello lovely people, my name is Nicole and today February is over. Well, yesterday February was, you guys know what I mean. Anyway, February is over and so it's time for my February wrap up. I had a pretty damn good reading month. I'm not saying I loved everything I read, there were a few definite flops, but like numbers wise, I had a really good reading month. So let's just jump right in. The first book I read this month was The Secret Love of Geek Girls by Hope Nicholson. This is an anthology about love in geekdom. There's some comics, there's some art, there's some prose, there's some like personal essay type things, and I ended up really enjoying it. There were some, obviously, as with most anthologies, that worked better for me than others. I don't have the book with me, unfortunately. It's back home, so I can't flip through and say specifically which ones were better than others. I do remember really loving Marguerite Bennett's story, though. I thought there was a really good balance of comics to prose, and within the written stories it felt like there was a good balance of sort of more personal essay type things versus more stylized type things. I don't think there was anything that was super mind-blowing in it, but it's definitely, I think, a really fun read, so I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Fireside by Casey West, and I love Casey West. She writes adorable, fluffy contemporaries, and they just make me happy so much, and this one is no different. I thought the main character was super cute and charming. There were a couple of times where I got a little bit of like secondhand embarrassment for her, but it was less of a like, oh my god, like this character is weird and awful, and more of just a, she's kind of dorky and it's charming, really. The relationship in this book is super cute, and it deals with some kind of heavy topics, but I think it handles them in a really good way. This book touches on some darker stuff than Casey West's books I feel like usually do, but like I said, I think it handled it really well. The main character has anxiety, which I think was portrayed really well. I've seen a number of people sort of not agree with that and think that it wasn't a great portrayal, but I think it matches up pretty well with how my anxiety works. So at least for me, it worked. The one thing that I think I had an issue with was they were trapped in a library for like the first half of this book, but it didn't really like do anything. I mean, it definitely, like, being trapped together definitely did things for their relationship. It just felt like they could have been trapped together anywhere, and the fact that it was a library didn't really make a difference. And I just would have loved to get a little bit more book lovin' in there. So I gave this 4.5 stars. Then I read Boyfriends with Girlfriends by Alex Sanchez. And I say I read it, I DNF'd it like really early, way earlier than I normally like to DNF books. But I still want to talk about it just because I have a lot of emotions. I wrote a full scathing Goodreads review, which I'll link in the doobly-doo, just because that is more articulate than I ever am in videos. But basically, I just had a lot of issues with the way that bisexuality was talked about, and for that, it was clearly something that was going to be addressed later in the book. I just couldn't stand the book long enough to get to the part where they addressed it. I didn't like the general writing style, just wasn't for me. I had to double check when the book was published, because I swear to God, the way that the teenagers were written, the way that they were dressing, just the way that they talked, it felt like it was from like 2003, but nope, it's like 2012, so that was unfortunate. The way that they talked about the lesbian character was borderline transphobic. I'm pretty sure they called her a dude chick at one point because she just dressed kind of androgynously, and when she first met her love interest, that love interest was pretty much like, oh my god, you're Japanese, I am obsessed with Japanese culture, let's not talk about like you at all, let's just talk about your culture, and like fetishize it and gross stuff like that, and it just was so cringeworthy. And then there were just a lot of like one-off lines that I was just like, yikes, this is not cool. There was just nothing about it that worked for me, which is a shame because I went into it really excited because it's a book with multiple bisexual characters and racial diversity and so much queerness, and I was so excited. It's been on my list of things to take a look at and read for a really long time, but nothing about it was good for me. So I ended up giving it 1 star. I normally don't like to star rate books that I DNF, especially that early, but honestly, this was just so bad that I had to give it 1 star. Then I read Tell Me Again How a Crush Should Feel by Sarah Farzan, and in contrast to the previous one, this one was so good. The characters, for the most part, were complex and interesting. The relationships were not like cut and dry. They felt real, and they weren't always easy or pretty or convenient, but I felt like they were really honest. I loved reading through the main character's point of view, and I felt like the plot went in an interesting place. And what I mean by that is that there was a road that I thought it was going to go down, and it very much did not go down it. It went in a different, better, more interesting place, because there was more of sort of the cliche road versus the interesting. You get it. Pretty much my only issue with it was that there was a lot of petty teen drama, which now that I'm out of high school, I kind of can't stand. I mean, I get it when teen characters are in high school in books that there's like teen drama, because like high school's the worst. But it's just kind of exhausting to read about, and I just find that I don't care about it. But that being said, I love Sarah Farzan's writing. I really liked the vast majority of this book, so I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Illuminate by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff, and this is a book that has been on my TBR for a while, pretty much ever since people started getting ARCs at BEA, the year that all the artists were available. I've been like interested in this book, and I've heard so many people talking about it, so many people raving about it, and for me, it was okay. I didn't absolutely love it. I didn't hate it. I think part of the reason I didn't get super into it was just because it wasn't what I was expecting. When people described it as being a bunch of like secret government documents and like security footage, I expected some like political spy thriller kind of thing. No, that's not what it was. It was more zombies in space, which is fine. It's just not really what I tend to read. So that definitely threw me off a bit. I also, because we never actually read from the point of view or read very closely to any of the characters, I never really got very attached to either the characters or their relationship. The format is really interesting, and it's not like nothing I've ever read before, and I do recognize that I think there's a lot of merit in that, and I think that it served its purpose very well, especially in the action scenes. I normally get very easily lost in hectic action scenes, but the way that they did the climactic scenes in this book managed to feel hectic and have that atmosphere of all the craziness of everything going on at once and like people shooting and dying and everything, but it didn't get too confusing. It didn't get hectic as a reading experience. So I don't have like a very strong opinion either way on this book. It wasn't really my thing, but I do recognize that it's doing something new, and it's doing something new in a really cool and interesting way, and I appreciate that. So it's the kind of thing where like if the sequel falls into my hands, I'll probably read it, but I won't go out and like spend money on it. So I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Then I read You Know Me Well by Nina Liqueur, and I love this book. I've always loved Nina Liqueur's writing. She's one of my all-time favorite authors, and I feel like her writing style is just so beautiful and poetic and atmospheric. It has that really like soft, pretty aesthetic, but it also gets into all these really interesting, deep issues. I feel like this is a book that you should go into not really knowing a ton about. I will say that there's a queer element, and I think that was handled so well, and so well done. I fell so in love with these characters and their relationship and just everything that was going on. There's some pretty deep stuff in this, and it's all done absolutely beautifully, and it's all done with Nina Liqueur's gorgeous voice that is just so perfect and wonderful, and I just love this book so very much. This is one of those books that is very small, but packs a really big punch. So I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Lullabies by Lang Leave, and this is a poetry collection, and I really enjoyed this. Clearly I tabbed a lot of things, as I do with my poetry. Her writing style is beautiful. I feel like this collection is a mix of some more traditionally formatted poetry using technical elements like rhyming and rhythm and all those things, and the very short, impactful bits of poetry that you see in like Amanda Lovelace or Ruby Kaur kind of style, and slightly longer pieces that are formatted and read a little bit more like prose, but more beautiful and poetic. I still don't really know how to describe poetry and how to talk about poetry in like a review sense, but I do know that I really enjoy this, and I think it's worth flipping through. I feel like poetry is such a personal taste kind of thing that it's hard to recommend poetry books to people unless you really know their personal taste. But I liked it. It worked for me, so I gave it 4 stars. Then, more poetry. I read Stuff I've Been Feeling Lately by Alicia Cook, and again, tabbed quite a bit. This book of poetry is really interesting and different because the first half is just sort of, it's poetry, it's sort of your generic format and whatever, but each one has a what I'm listening to right now and then a song beneath it, which is really cool. It's just kind of adds a little extra something and matches up with the sort of mixtape theme. And then the second section is the remixes, and that's blackout poetry using the original poems, which is really cool because it takes these poems that are, you know, originally about one thing and sort of remixes them and shows a hidden meaning or a second meaning or just all this, just really cool. And I don't know how to talk about poetry. I've said that a billion times, but it's true. But this is cool and y'all should check it out, and it's self-published, which is great. So you should support her because she's awesome. And then I read Star-Crossed by Barbara D, and I loved this. It makes me so excited because it's a middle grade book about 13-year-olds who are exploring their sexuality and romantic identities, and it's so great. I say exploring their sexuality, I mean like bisexuality versus like heterosexual, that kind of thing. But I think it's so great because I think it handles the idea of sexuality in a way that is appropriate for the age group. I think a lot of times the idea of being gay or being bi is so automatically thought of as adult, as explicit, and this is not that. It is sweet and genuine, and it explains things really well without feeling preachy. The main character is super sweet and smart. There's Shakespeare, which is so much fun. There's a really cool sort of parallel between the plot that's going on in the production of Romeo and Juliet they're putting on and also what's going on IRL. That's really fun without being like super over the top, like obvious. It's subtle, but like in all the right ways. And it's just charming and wonderful, and I love it so much. There is a lot of petty teen drama, but again, they're 13, so it makes sense in the context of the age of the characters and the age of the intended audience. So I think it worked really well. This is an arc. This book comes out on the 14th, and I highly recommend y'all pick it up when it comes out because it's so wonderful. I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read A List of Cages by Robin Rowe, and this is kind of an intense read. There's a lot going on. I do want to give a trigger warning. There are some pretty graphic scenes of child abuse in this, but it handles some really difficult topics, and I think it does it really well and really honestly. It doesn't give a happily ever after and suddenly because he had friends suddenly everything was magical and okay. Like, it handles them realistically. I loved Adam as a character. I thought he was charming and entertaining and just so much fun to read from the point of view of. That's pretty much the only happy part of the story. It's a very intense story. I think it handles everything really well. I think it addresses everything really well. The main subject of the story, that of sort of an abusive home, is not one that I'm super familiar with. I haven't done a ton of research. I don't have personal experience with it, so I can't say exactly the accuracy of the representation or anything, but I do think it was really well written, and I think the characters were complex and interesting, so I gave it 4 stars. Then I read A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab, and I finished this book last night, and I literally just had to like sit there and like snuggle it and just have an emotional breakdown because it's so good. It's such a brilliant finale, and it flew by. I could not put it down. I love V.E. Schwab's writing. I've always loved V.E. Schwab's writing. Her characters are so like deep and complex and interesting, and I feel like I'm describing everything as complex and interesting, but you guys know what I mean. It's V.E. Schwab. I love V.E. Schwab. She's one of my all-time favorite authors. I got to interview her when she was here in Seattle promoting this book, and I'll leave a link in the doobly-doo because it was so much fun and like a dream come true. But this series was wrapped up in such a brilliant way. It was thrilling, and I was on the edge of my seat and crying. The perfect amount of stress, because I feel like there should be some stress when you're reading a really good series finale. It's that like, what's gonna happen, and you're so emotionally invested that you can't handle it, and you're so stressed wanting to make sure everyone's okay. It was so good. I love Rai Maresh. I just really love Rai Maresh is the main thing from this. He's my fave, and like A+ by representation. It's so good. It's so good. And the relationships are wonderful. Holland is Holland, and I love him. And Lila and Kel are amazing and in love and beautiful. And Alucard is such a wonderful asshole, and I love him so much. Like, he's like an asshole, but in like the endearing way, you know? It's great. It's just, there were so many moments that were so funny and charming, and so many moments that had me in tears. And it's just the perfect series finale, and I love it so much, so I give it 5 stars, of course. And then, in contrast, I read Nightwood by Juna Barnes. I'm sorry, I probably am not pronouncing that right, but it doesn't matter because she's probably dead, because this was written in the 30s. This is a piece of modernist literature. I read it for a class, and oh my god, it's one of those books that is like intentionally hard to read and intentionally confusing, and I hate that. I also hate the treatment of women. I hate the fact that the main, like the character that the entire book like revolves around is like the only character that's not a POV character, and she's such a manic pixie dream girl, and it makes me so mad on her behalf, because I'm like, she could have been a really interesting complex character, but she was treated like shit by the narrative and by the narration style, and it makes me so mad, because you get 150, 180 pages of other people talking about her, but like you never actually get to know her, and it's frustrating and annoying, and I don't know or care if that was like the point of the book, but I don't like it, and it makes me upset. And it also makes me upset because like this is, at least on the back it says that it's like a classic of modernist and lesbian literature. I want to love it because like classic lesbian literature, but like no. Also, I would question the lesbianness. Reads more as bisexual. Let's not erase bisexuals, even though this was written in the 30s when like that wasn't really an identity that was well known. There were just so many things I found frustrating about this, and I didn't like it at all, so I gave it 1 star. And then I read, and when I say I read, I mean I literally finished it now. Like, my camera died in the middle of filming this video, and while I was waiting for it to charge, I finished this book. And that book is Queendom Peak by Jen Wilde. This is an ARC. I got it from a family friend who has connections. This is so good. I'm gonna do a full review on it, so I don't want to say too much right now, but like, wow, it's awesome. First of all, like, holy representation, Batman. The 2 main characters, one of them is Chinese Australian and bisexual, and her sexuality is written so perfectly, and the other one, she has anxiety and she's fat and she's on the autism spectrum. Can't speak to how good the autism representation is because I don't have that experience, but the anxiety representation is so good. It describes her having a panic attack once or twice, and it's so well done, and like the context in which she gets anxiety and the way she describes how it feels is exactly on point with mine. And it's geeky because they're at a convention, and it's just so much fun. There's some fantastic, awesome romance, and it's just so good. Like I said, I'm going to do a full review on this, so stay tuned for that because it's amazing. I gave it 5 stars. Anyway, those are all the books I read this month. Let me know what you think of any of them in the comments. I love you, and I will see you later.